Hey y'all, you're tuned into Assigned Sex Unarchived. I'm your non-binary cousin Shaun Dawson, and this is a safe space where we're honest about what it means to show up as Black, trans, and genderqueer. Today I want to talk about credit. When people tell the stories of our freedom, Stonewall, Pride, the movement, whose names do we hear over and over, and whose work gets treated like it never happened at all? I'm going to get into how our stories get cleaned up for TV and textbooks, why the same kinds of faces end up in the documentaries, and how we can start naming the people around us who actually keep us alive as part of the revolution too. Let's get into it.
Nothing. I've been trying to get up here all day for your gay brothers and your gay sisters in jail. They're writing me every motherfucking week and ask for your help. And you all don't do a goddamn thing for them.
That's Sylvia Rivera, 1973. She co-founded the Star House, fed homeless trans youth, helped make every pride you've ever been to possible, and the crowd was booing her off on stage. This episode is about how that happens. When I think about Black queer history, a person that really sticks out to me is Bayard Rustin. He was the man that organized the 1963 March on Washington from scratch in about 7 weeks. Permits, the transportation from 44 states, security. It was 250,000 people in D.C., and this was all pre-internet. Then a few days before the march, this dude tried to destroy him. I can't remember dude's name, but he called him a communist, a draft dodger, a homosexual, and brought up something he was arrested for like 10 years before. So Martin Luther King's inner circle debated cutting Bayard loose after that. They was like, Bayard, that's too much. Luckily, they ended up letting him stay though. He read the demands to the crowd that day, and he was literally standing a few feet from Martin Luther King when he gave the big I Have a Dream speech.
The first demand is that we have effective civil rights legislation, no compromise, no filibuster, and that it include public accommodations, decent housing, integrated education, FEPC, and the right to vote. What do you say? Number two.
Now, I don't remember hearing that story at all in any classroom. He was pretty much erased from history, and that's wild because I know people that didn't even know who Bayard Rustin was until Coleman Domingo played him in that movie that came out in 2023.
Well, Mr. Randolph asked me if I would set up the logistics for the march, which I immediately began to do. And those logistics were to create a 200,000 people. We really got 250,000. And to get every agency in America, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, intellectuals, labor movement, everybody involved, and to contain it so it was intensely nonviolent.
It says a whole lot when a movement will take all your labor and then erase your face in the same breath. The architecture of the whole movement gets flattened into this respectable image, and I don't think that's a mistake. Somebody, somewhere, made a decision about who you were allowed to see and who has to stay in the shadows to keep that story comfortable. I think there's this pattern where the more threatening a movement really is, the harder it gets sanitized. It's definitely not we forgot. They want a hero that's not too gay, too angry, too poor, too Black, too trans, too sex worker. And that's why Bayard got left out of history. He was too gay. When I think about Black and brown, trans, and gender fluid people who've been flattened, I think of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera.
You all tell me to go and hide my tail between my legs. I will not longer put up with this shit. I have been beaten. I have had my nose broken. I have been thrown in jail. I have lost my job. I have lost my apartment for gay liberation. And you all treat me this way? What the fuck's wrong with you all? Think about that. I do not believe in a revolution, but you all do. I believe in the gay power. I believe in us getting our rights, or else I would not be out there fighting for our rights.
They were bringing people out of the bar, and the drag queens were the ones that were getting busted. But I don't know if
that
that's
many
true.
drag queens. That's just Stonewall.
So maybe that's not right. I don't know.
Well,
You didn't get arrested at Stonewall.
No. I don't remember any drag queens getting arrested at Stonewall.
Oh, maybe they didn't. Maybe that's just wrong.
They got so many wrong things that they never all can be corrected.
Most people, they only know that one line. They threw the first brick at Stonewall. If you do just a little bit of digging, you'll see that the internet has spent so many years fact-checking that line. And I also want to point out that Marsha herself says she wasn't even there when the riot started. So I feel like that one line has made the actual work that Marsha and Sylvia did disappear, because they were housing homeless trans youth, feeding them, advocating for them to city government, and they were doing this all at the time when the mainstream gay movement wanted nothing to do with them at all. So we turned these two superheroes into a trivia question about a brick, then argued the trivia to death while their housing work, their mutual aid, their political strategy got lost underneath it all.
Protest is set for today at the historic Stonewall National Monument. It follows changes by the U.S. National Park Service to the monument's website. The words transgender and queer have been scrubbed from the website, along with the letters T and Q from LGBTQ.
Right now, I would say these stories are getting cleaned up by y'all president. I'll give a real world example. Stonewall. The Stonewall Inn became a national monument in 2016. So it's like, ooh, we got to win. But look at how the story gets handled. Last year, the National Park Service softens DEI-related language across multiple sites, including Stonewall.
You can already see on the National Parks website those changes, most references to trans and queer people are already removed, shortening the LGBTQ plus acronym to LGB, lesbian, gay, and bisexual. And this all comes after an executive order signed by the president on his first day in office.
So the site named for a riot led mainly by gender-nonconforming people becomes a place where the trans part of the story are the first to go when people in power get nervous. That's crazy. Another example, I'm going to stick with Stonewall because I'm in my Stonewall bag today, is this 2015 film about Stonewall by a filmmaker. His name is Roland Emmerich. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. If I'm saying it wrong, good. Anyway, the main character in this film isn't a trans woman of color. It's not a local queen. It's this fictional white cis gay man from Indiana who throws the first brick. So I don't even have to tell y'all the film got dragged. And basically it's just been erased from memory by everybody. My point in giving this example is audacity. Like, nobody forced Hollywood to whitewash Stonewall. The appetite for a safe, white-centered story was already there, and this filmmaker just fed into it. Let's flip it and talk about something a little bit more positive. So while these institutions are always busy cleaning up the story, there's always somebody that's doing the opposite work. For over 20 years, Tourmaline, who is a Black trans filmmaker and activist, has been trying to piece together Marsha P. Johnson's story, the real Marsha P. Johnson story. Tourmaline's been digging through archives that barely saved anything about trans people, and she's doing it without the kind of funding or institutional backing that usually decides whose history is even worth keeping. Back in 2018, she made Happy Birthday, Marsha, which is a film that imagines the hours before Stonewall from Marsha's perspective. And then last year, she published a book. It's called Marsha, The Joy and Defiance of Marsha P. Johnson. And that's the first full-length biography ever written about Marsha P. Johnson. Okay, so it's time for Little Black Trans and Genderqueer History. Today we're centering the story of Stormé DeLarverie.
My name is Stormé DeLarverie. I was with the Jewel Box 14 years. I joined them in 1955 in January, and I left in September the 7th, 1969.
Storm was born in New Orleans in 1920. Black mom, white dad. She grew up poor and aware that the world didn't have her back. Kids were on her head early, to the point where by the time she was a teenager, she already knew how to square up just to ensure she made it home in one piece.
The white kids were beating me up, the black kids were beating, everybody was jumping on me. If it wasn't because of my father's money, it was because of being a Negro with a white face. Yeah. So he told me if I didn't stop running, I'd be running the rest of my life. And when I was 15, I stopped running, and I haven't run a day since.
As she got older, she left the South and went north into show business, on her own terms. She wasn't interested in being anybody's pretty little chorus girl. She became a drag king before that term was even a thing, performing at the Jewel Box, one of the first racially integrated drag shows touring the country. I want to make clear that this is 40s and 50s America. Segregation is still the law of the land, and Storm is on stage in a suit, tie, short hair, singing and moving in a way that made people think twice about what a man even looks like.
Men's jackets were loose, but the pants were skin tight. And if I ever took my jacket off on stage, the dirt was out. But you know, the strange thing is, I never moved any different than I had when I was wearing women's clothes. The only thing changed, they only saw what they wanted to see. And they believed what they wanted to believe.
The show was called 25 Men and One Girl, with Storm as the girl. That was the joke. Off stage, she kept the suits on. They weren't a costume she took off at the end of the night. It was how she moved through the world.
So I tried to do the proper thing, wear men's clothes on stage and wear women's clothes on the street. I got picked up twice for being a drag queen.
People have used all kinds of words for her over the years. Butch, stud, drag king, lesbian, gender nonconforming. She didn't have terms like non-binary or trans masc back then. But she also wasn't playing along with what woman was supposed to mean. She dressed like a gentleman, and people learned quickly to always treat her like one.
And the rest of it I knew. I grew up hard in New Orleans with my mixed blood. So I was my own responsibility. And I kept the touch of class. And it was very easy. All I had to do was just be me. And let people use their imaginations. It never changed me.
Then there was Stonewall. Different people tell the story different ways because that night was chaotic. Some say Stormy threw the first punch, some say the first bottle, some say she was the one yelling at the crowd to stop just standing there. In most versions, officers are dragging and hitting her when she looks out and tells the crowd to act. That shout is part of what turns a raid into what we now call the Stonewall Uprising.
That was no riot. Everybody says a riot. It was a disobedience, and then they started fighting back. It was a rebellion. And once they got the hang of it, they rebelled quite well.
After that night, she kept doing the work, but not as anyone's official activist. In the village, she was known as a guardian. For decades, queer folks, and especially women and femmes, talk about seeing this older, sharp-dressed, masked black person roaming the neighborhood, working security at lesbian bars, walking people to their cars, and stepping in when a man would not let a woman go. There are stories of Storm physically putting herself between people and harm.
Sometimes I feel half the universe is my family.
Her personal life stayed mostly quiet, but what we do know is she loved women and she lived as an out lesbian. Add being mixed, being masked, and being visibly gender nonconforming in public every day. She caught it from white and black queer spaces alike. Storm never called herself trans. She came up in a time when language was limited, and most people just put lesbian or butch on her and kept it moving. When you look at the photos, the way she talked about herself, and the way she insisted on moving through the world in a mass lane, it's clear. For black, trans, and genderqueer folks now, especially the masked girls, studs, and trans masked folk who sit in that blur between butch lesbian and boy, Storm is part of that lineage, whether the paperwork said it or not.
Some say sir, and some say ma'am, and that's the way it is. I never change expression. It makes no difference to me.
Storm passed away in 2014 in her 90s. After a lifetime of performing, fighting, and literally patrolling the block so other queer people could get home safe. When we talk about Black, trans, and genderqueer joy and survival, Storm is in the background. That mixed-race kid from New Orleans who grew up into a drag king, a Stonewall fighter, and the neighborhood auntie with the hands.
Somebody told me that I couldn't do it and that I would completely ruin my reputation and that people did not have enough problems being Black. I said, I didn't have any problem with it. Everybody else did.
The official story is rarely about the people who did the work. It's more about who the storytellers are comfortable putting on the poster. And now that we're here in 2026, the editing process is still happening in real time right in front of us. Let's talk about pinkwashing. Pinkwashing is when a company or a government leans on LGBTQ plus rights or imagery to look progressive while doing the things that actually harm the same communities. It's a marketing or a political move that creates this superficial appearance of allyship.
What's up, y'all? Happy Pride, baby. Happy Pride, baby.
I'll give you a recent example of pinkwashing. Let's go back to New York City Pride 2024. The theme is Reflect, Empower, Unite. The press release is centering joy, liberation, community, blah, 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 blah. So now let's line that up with who we see on the main stage and in the front of the parade. You've got financial giants like JP Morgan, pharma companies like Pfizer. You got liquor giants anchoring sponsorships, and they're getting prime visibility, using Pride to launder their brands and bring in LGBTQ talent and consumers. But if you go looking for organizations like the Audre Lorde Project or Fierce, who spent years doing grassroots work with Black and brown, trans, and queer folks, they're either pushed to the back, underfunded, or they be holding separate community-centered events because the corporate Pride event just didn't really line up with the work that they do. Then there's this whole fight over cops being at Pride.
The Pride March is an annual celebration of self-acceptance, but now organizers say in an effort to be more inclusive, they have to keep law enforcement out.
Back in 2021, New York City Pride said the police weren't allowed to march in the parade until at least 2025. That came after years of people calling out the police and all of their violence against queer and trans folks. So on paper, it sounds like we made a little bit of progress, but Pride still relies on thousands of armed officers to secure that event. So police are actually still controlling the space. They just can't march in uniform.
Let's be clear. No one is asking for special treatment here. We are asking to be seen for who we are and what we've earned. We march to honor those who couldn't. We march for those who had to serve in silence. We march because being visible, especially in uniform, is still to this day an act of courage. And yes, we've heard the message being sent to us that we don't belong. But this is our answer. We are not going anywhere. We are not stepping aside. We are not stepping back. And we're not stepping out of uniform just to make someone else comfortable.
Meanwhile, the Gay Officers Action League and the NYPD commissioner are going on TV, calling the band hypocritical and organizing protests because they want to be visible in the parade. It's important that we notice what the argument is really about, though, because it doesn't sound like safety. They want the image of policing inside an event that started out as a protest against policing. So now you've got corporations using Pride to clean up their reputation. You got police fighting for a place in the parade. And the people that are most impacted by both are pushed to the margins. That's what pinkwashing looks like.
New York City Pride was born out of the Stonewall Uprising of 1969, where right here law enforcement violently clashed with the LGBTQ plus community. And critics say over time, the Pride March has veered from its initial purpose.
As I've worked on this project, I've had the chance to really sit with the lives and the work of a lot of Black, trans, and gender nonconforming people. What I've learned so far about reclaiming our history is, first, say where you got things from. So if you're using a Black, trans, or gender nonconforming person's idea, framework, strategy, you got to say their name, especially if they're not in the room. Second, put some money behind it. Don't pay with exposure, because exposure don't pay rent. Third, we really have to change who we center. So when you're planning a panel, a podcast episode, a class, don't only invite the marginalized folks to talk about their trauma. And finally, stop pretending the proof isn't there, because Black, trans, and gender nonconforming folks, we've always been doing the work that moved things forward. We just rarely get any visibility. So the real question isn't who did the work, it's whether we're still going to let the same institutions decide who gets remembered. So that wasn't as simple as I thought it was going to be in the beginning, so I want to summarize. Honoring Black, trans, and gender nonconforming work means giving people real credit, real resources, and real space, and taking control of how history gets recorded instead of letting the usual institutions rewrite or erase it. All right, y'all. That's all I got for today. If you'd like details on the archival audio featured in this episode, check out the show notes. If this episode dragged you a little bit, or if it hugged you a little bit, please share it with someone you love. You can find me, your non-binary cousin Shaun Dawson, on all platforms at IAMS Dawson. Y'all be safe out there.